People of the world, I stand here today, not as a man seeking revenge, but as one who has witnessed the truth unfold in the most painful way. I want you to understand the gravity of what happened. I want you to hear my words, because these words are not just for Cyril Ramaphosa. These words are for all those who think they can play with the fate of nations, who believe they can manipulate and break the spirits of our people, without consequence. I wrote a letter, yes, but it wasn't just a letter, it was a message. A message of justice, a message of resistance, and above all a message of truth. I poured my heart into those words not because I wanted to harm anyone, but because I wanted to show the world what happens when a leader forgets the very essence of leadership. Ramaphosa, a man who was supposed to stand tall for his people, crumbled under the weight of his own deception. He couldn't face the truth that had been staring him in the face for years. He thought he could silence those who dared to speak out, those who dared to question the corruption and mismanagement that was festering in his administration. He thought he could break us down, keep us in line with empty promises and lies. But he was wrong. He was terribly wrong. When I wrote that letter, I did not just expose him for his failures. I exposed the system, the very foundation on which he built his power. And as I watched him break down live on television, I realized something profound. It wasn't just his pride that was shattered in that moment. It was his entire narrative. The story he had been feeding the world for years was unraveled in front of millions, and there was no way to put the pieces back together. The letter wasn't just words on paper, it was the truth, and the truth, as they say, has a way of crushing those who stand on falsehoods. Ramaphosa stood there, caught in the web of his own lies, and for the first time, the world saw him for what he truly is, a man who has lost his way, a man who cannot handle the pressure of the truth. But let me be clear, this is not just about him. This is about all of us. It's about every person who has ever felt ignored, silenced, or betrayed by those in power. This is about the people who have suffered under the weight of injustice, and who have been told that their voices do not matter. I stood up for them when no one else would. I spoke the truth when others were afraid. And when I saw his face crumble, I knew that what we had been fighting for was not just a battle for power, it was a battle for the soul of our nation. So yes, Cyril Ramaphosa may have been broken in that moment, but it wasn't just his defeat, it was the defeat of every lie, every manipulation, and every empty promise he had ever made. And as I look forward, I see a future where we the people will no longer tolerate the games of those who think they can control us. I am not here to gloat, and I am not here to seek revenge. I am here to ensure that the truth prevails. And as long as I breathe, I will continue to fight for the justice and the freedom that our people deserve. This is not over. It has only just begun. The power of truth. Ibrahim Traoré's letter wasn't just a document, it was a powerful truth, aimed at exposing the corruption and mismanagement in Cyril Ramaphosa's leadership. The truth behind the letter became undeniable, causing Ramaphosa's downfall. It was a wake-up call to the world, an awakening that shattered the illusion he had carefully crafted around himself. For years, people in power have relied on a simple strategy: control the narrative, shape the perception, and silence any voice that dares to speak the truth. But what happens when that narrative is exposed for what it is? Nothing but a facade. What happens when the world finally sees the cracks in the structure built on lies and deceit? Ramaphosa learned that the truth cannot be hidden forever. My letter was merely the vehicle for the truth to travel. And once it was set free, there was no stopping it. I didn't write the letter for personal gain, nor did I write it to cause chaos for chaos's sake. I wrote it because I saw the damage being done, not just to South Africa, but to the people who had placed their trust in a leader who promised them a better future, but delivered nothing but disappointment. It was the accumulation of years of corruption, mismanagement, and broken promises that led me to speak out. And when I did, it wasn't just my voice that echoed through the halls of power. It was the voices of every citizen who had been lied to, manipulated, and ignored. Ramaphosa thought he could weather the storm. He thought that by holding on to his position, his influence, his wealth, he could suppress the truth. But the power of truth is not something you can silence. It has a way of breaking through barriers, cutting through the noise, and finding its way into the hearts of those who need to hear it the most. When I wrote those words, I knew that once they were out in the open, there would be no returning to the comfort of silence. The truth would echo, it would resonate, and it would shake the foundations of everything he had worked so hard to build. What struck me the most as I watched Ramaphosa's reaction was not his tears or his attempt to defend himself. It was the realization that in that moment, the world saw him for the first time without the mask. What I exposed was not just a series of corrupt actions or poor decisions. It was the entire system of governance he had built around him. One that was designed to protect him at all costs, while leaving the people to fend for themselves. His fall wasn't just about the collapse of his reputation. It was the collapse of everything he represented, a leadership that only serves the powerful, while disregarding the needs of the people. When the letter went public, I knew it would be a defining moment. I could feel the weight of every word, every sentence. It wasn't just a critique of Ramaphosa's leadership, it was a condemnation of the system that allowed such leaders to thrive. A system that rewards those who lie, those who deceive, and those who hold on to power by any means necessary. I wasn't just fighting against a man, I was fighting against an entire machine that perpetuates injustice, inequality, and corruption. Ramaphosa's breakdown was not an isolated incident, it was the breaking point of a much larger issue. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't just break down walls, it builds new ones, stronger ones. The truth isn't an end, it's a beginning. And when that truth hit, it sparked something in the people. It gave them a voice, it gave them a reason to believe that change was possible. For too long, they had been told that nothing would change, that their voices didn't matter, that they were powerless. But with that letter I shattered that narrative. I showed them that power is not given, it's taken. It's taken by those who dare to stand up, speak out, and refuse to be silent. The letter was not just a call to action, it was an invitation to take control of the story. And when Ramaphosa broke down on live television, it wasn't just his image that was destroyed. It was the myth of invincibility that surrounds so many of these so-called leaders. For too long they've been able to manipulate the media, to create an illusion of strength and success. But that moment, that very moment, showed the world that even the most powerful can fall. And when they do, it's the people who will rise up and carry the truth forward. I did not expect Ramaphosa to fall so quickly. I knew the system was rigged. I knew the forces of power would try to protect him, but the truth had gathered such momentum that it could not be stopped. Watching him try to maintain his composure, to hold on to the narrative he had spun, was a spectacle in itself. But what was more powerful than his breakdown was the realization that this wasn't just his story anymore, it was the people's story. They were the ones who had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the truth to be told, and once it was, there was no going back. The aftermath was inevitable. Ramaphosa's reputation was in tatters, and his grip on power began to slip. But the real victory wasn't in his downfall, it was in the rise of the people. They had been waiting for a sign, a symbol, something to show them that their voices mattered, and in that moment, I gave them that. I gave them the truth. Ramaphosa's defeat was a symbol of something much larger than just one man's failure. It was the defeat of a system that has kept people in chains for far too long. It was the collapse of a narrative that had been propped up by lies and deceit. And in the end, it was the truth that triumphed. The letter wasn't just words, it was the turning point. It was the moment when the world realized that even the most powerful leaders are not above the truth. And when that truth comes out, nothing can stop it from changing everything. Now as I look ahead, I see a new world. A world where the people know their power, where they understand that the truth will always find a way. This fight is not over. It has just begun. The letter may have broken Ramaphosa, but the truth will break every system that stands in the way of justice and freedom. And that is a battle worth fighting for. The crumbling of Ramaphosa's narrative. The letter dismantled the image Ramaphosa had carefully constructed of himself as a strong and capable leader. His breakdown in front of millions exposed the fragility of his position, and the world saw him for what he truly was, a man unable to face the reality of his failures. For years Ramaphosa had built a reputation around himself as a man of integrity, a leader who could bring South Africa into a new era of prosperity. He projected an image of calm, composed authority, always measured in his speech and actions, hiding behind the polished veneer of a leader who had it all figured out. But the truth, as always, has a way of cutting through all of that. The moment my letter was released, his carefully crafted narrative began to crumble, piece by piece, like a house of cards caught in a storm. What struck me as I watched him collapse live on television wasn't just the shock on his face, it was the realization that he had no plan, no backup, no way to recover from the truth being laid bare. In that moment it wasn't just his political career that was on the line, it was the very identity he had spent years building. Everything he had claimed to be strong, steady, and in control, vanished in an instant. His response wasn't that of a leader who had the answers, but that of a man who was cornered, unable to cope with the weight of his own failures. He tried, of course, to salvage some dignity, to save face in front of the cameras. But it was too late. The cracks had already formed and there was no way to hide them anymore. His breakdown revealed what was always there, beneath the surface, a leader who lacked the fortitude to confront the challenges facing his country. The public saw him for what he truly was, a man who had built his political empire on the backs of promises he could never keep, on rhetoric that rang hollow in the face of the real issues South Africa was grappling with. What was most telling was his inability to confront the reality that I had exposed. Ramaphosa's entire political career was built on the illusion of strength, of capability. He was a man who relied on appearances, on the idea that if you look strong enough, no one will question your action. But the truth had a different power, one that cannot be ignored or hidden behind a well-practiced smile. And in that moment, as the world watched his face twist with frustration and defeat, I saw something I had long suspected. He was never truly in control. The power he wielded was an illusion. And now it was unraveling before everyone's eyes. It was almost as if he had been living in a world of make-believe, where the rules of reality didn't apply to him. But no matter how hard he tried to cling to that image, no matter how many speeches he gave or promises he made, it couldn't withstand the force of the truth that his leadership had failed. The truth that his promises had been nothing but words meant to placate, meant to distract. Watching him try to manage his emotions in that moment was almost heartbreaking. Here was a man who had made a career of being calculated, controlled, never letting anyone see his weakness. And yet, there it was for the world to see. A man stripped of his power, exposed for his inability to govern, and for his neglect of the very people who trusted him. The cracks in his narrative weren't subtle anymore. They were glaring. His breakdown was not just a personal defeat. It was the death of a carefully constructed persona that had fooled many for so long. But this wasn't just about him. His breakdown signified something deeper, something far more significant. It was a shift in the political landscape. The message was clear: you can't hold power forever on lies and deceit. The people have a way of seeing through the smoke and mirrors. Once the truth comes out, there's no going back. Ramaphosa's fall wasn't just a result of my letter. It was the inevitable consequence of years of mismanagement. Years of promises made and never kept, and the moment that truth became undeniable, his narrative collapsed in front of millions, leaving him exposed and powerless. And that's the irony of it all, isn't it? His entire career was built on a narrative that said, I am the strong leader, I am the one who can fix things, I am the one you can rely on. But when it came time to face the consequences of his actions, when it came time to confront the truth that had been hiding in plain sight, he buckled under the pressure. The mask slipped, the image he had carefully painted for the world shattered in an instant, and in its place was the raw reality of a leader who had been living in denial, unable to face the truth of his own failures. I'm not someone who celebrates another's downfall, but in that moment I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. It wasn't just about Ramaphosa, not really. It was about showing the world that the truth would always rise to the surface. No matter how much power or influence someone has, no matter how carefully they construct their narrative, the truth has a way of breaking through, and once it does, there's no hiding from it. But I also understood that this was not the end. It was the beginning of something much larger. It was the moment when the illusion of invincibility was shattered. Not just for Ramaphosa, but for anyone who thinks they can continue to deceive the people for their own gain. The collapse of his narrative wasn't just about him losing control. It was a message to every leader, every politician, who believes they can play with the truth without consequence. The people are watching, and the truth will always find a way to expose what's hidden in the dark. In the end, the Ramaphosa's breakdown was not just a moment of personal failure. It was the unraveling of a narrative that had fooled the world for far too long, and in its place the truth stood tall, unyielding, and impossible to ignore. The lesson was clear: you cannot build your legacy on lies. Eventually the truth will catch up to you, and when it does, it will break everything you've built. The world saw Ramaphosa for who he really was, and that is a truth that will stay with him forever. The betrayal of the people. This wasn't just a personal battle against Ramaphosa. It was about standing up for the people who had been ignored and betrayed by leaders who prioritized power and wealth over the welfare of their citizens. I have always believed that leadership is not about status or wealth. It is about service. When you take an oath to lead, You make a promise to the people that their needs, their struggles and their dreams will be your responsibility. But what we saw under Ramaphosa's rule wasn't leadership. It was a betrayal of the very people who put their trust in him. Ramaphosa promised change. He promised a new direction. He promised progress. But instead what we got was a continuation of the same old games: corruption, mismanagement and neglect. The people of South Africa were left to watch as their government grew more and more disconnected from their needs, more concerned with protecting its own interests than with delivering the very things it had promised. This wasn't just a failure of leadership, it was a failure to recognize the most basic duty of any leader: to serve the people, to listen to them, to understand their struggles, and to fight for a better future for them. What struck me the most as I saw Ramaphosa's actions unfold over the years was the growing divide between the leadership and the people. The gap between the promises made and the reality delivered was widening, and the people were the ones suffering. They were the ones being left behind. I've seen the pain in their eyes, heard their frustrations, felt their disillusionment. But most of all I saw their anger, a righteous anger that was long overdue. Ramaphosa's failure wasn't just about a lack of political will or bad decisions. It was about a complete disregard for the people who had entrusted him with their future. I have always said that the real power of any leader lies in the people they serve. A leader who forgets this is a leader doomed to fail. But Ramaphosa wasn't just failing the people, he was betraying them. And this betrayal wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a gradual process. One decision after another, one broken promise after another. While the people struggled to make ends meet, while families faced the crushing burden of poverty and unemployment, Ramaphosa and his cronies grew richer. They hoarded wealth, protected their own interests, and allowed corruption to fester in every corner of the government. The very institutions meant to serve the people became tools of exploitation and greed. I wasn't just fighting against a man, I was fighting against an entire system that was built to serve the few, not the many. A system that left the people vulnerable, without support, without hope. For too long, the leadership had used the people as pawns, pretending to care about their welfare, while lining their pockets. They promised land reform, promised jobs, promised better healthcare, better education. But when the time came to deliver, they failed. And that failure wasn't just political, it was personal. It was a betrayal that cut deep, because it was the people who paid the price. When I wrote that letter, it wasn't just an attack on Ramaphosa's leadership, it was a cry for justice for those who had been ignored. It was a challenge to a system that had for too long ignored the voices of the very people it was supposed to serve. I wanted to remind Ramaphosa that he wasn't in power for himself, that his position was a responsibility, not a privilege. I wanted to show him that the people would no longer be silent, that they would no longer allow themselves to be pawns in a game they never signed up for. I knew the consequences of speaking out. I knew it wouldn't be easy. But the truth needed to be told. The people needed to know that there was someone who was willing to stand up for them, to expose the truth and demand accountability. The people deserved better than this. They deserved a leader who would fight for them, not for his own interests. They deserved someone who would listen to their concerns and act on them, not someone who would make promises he never intended to keep. What I saw in Ramaphosa was not a leader who cared for the people. I saw a man who had forgotten why he was in power in the first place. A man who had grown so consumed by his own wealth and influence that he had lost touch with the reality of the people he was supposed to serve. And when the truth of his betrayal came to light, it wasn't just a blow to his ego, it was a reckoning for the people. The people who had hoped, who had believed and who had suffered. The people who had been lied to for far too long. As I watched him struggle to maintain control in the face of his own failure, I couldn't help but think of the countless South Africans who had been waiting for a leader to stand up for them. The ones who had been left behind by the promises of change. The ones who had been forgotten by the very people who had sworn to help them. It was for them that I stood up. It was for them that I wrote that letter. Because I knew that if we didn't speak out, if we didn't demand more, we would continue to live in a country where the people were nothing more than afterthoughts in the eyes of their leaders. Ramaphosa's breakdown wasn't just a personal failure. It was the culmination of a larger betrayal. It was the moment when the truth could no longer be ignored. And while he may have been exposed for his role in perpetuating the suffering of the people, the fight is far from over. It is a fight that will continue until the people are finally given the leadership they deserve, until the promises of a better future are turned into tangible realities, until those who have betrayed the people are held accountable, not just with words, but with actions that bring real lasting change. This is not a battle for power, this is a battle for the soul of the nation, and I will not stop fighting until the people of South Africa are no longer ignored, no longer betrayed and no longer left behind. They deserve better and I will stand with them to ensure they get it. Resistance against corruption. My actions, the letter I wrote. It wasn't just a critique of one man or one government. It became a symbol of something far greater. A resistance against corruption, a defiance against the lies that had for so long poisoned the very soul of our leadership. For too long, corruption had woven itself into the fabric of our political system, so tightly that no one even questioned it anymore. It had become the norm, a part of the system that we had come to accept as inevitable. But I refused to accept it. I couldn't, not while I knew how many lives were being destroyed by it, how many dreams were being shattered while the powerful continued to profit at the expense of the people. What I did wasn't just about exposing the wrongdoings of one leader. It was about saying enough. It was about standing up when everyone else had either chosen to look the other way or had been co-opted into the system. You see, the corruption wasn't just in the hands of a few, it was everywhere. It seeped into every corner of government, every institution that was meant to serve the people. It became the way of doing things, the unspoken rule: if you're in power, you're entitled to take what isn't yours, the people be damned. But I couldn't sit back and let that continue. The fight for justice can't be left to others, and the moment I saw the corruption that was thriving, unchecked in the highest offices, I knew I had to take a stand. When I wrote the letter, I didn't just write it to attack Ramaphosa or to bring him down. I wrote it to expose the systems of power that had protected him and allowed his corruption to flourish. The government had become a machine, a well-oiled mechanism that existed to serve the few, to fill their pockets while the rest of the country struggled. And the worst part was that they weren't even hiding it anymore. They acted with impunity, knowing that the system was built to protect them. They believed that they were untouchable, that their wealth and their influence were their shields against any consequences. But what I saw, and what I knew deep down, was that this could no longer go on. The people were tired. They were fed up, and they were ready for someone to step up, to stand in the face of this corruption and challenge it, head on. That's what I became, an instrument of resistance. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for the right moment. The right moment had already passed. The people had already suffered long enough. So I wrote the letter, and in doing so, I joined the ranks of those who refused to stay silent, who refused to allow corruption to rule their lives. I became a voice for the voiceless, a force against the forces that had for too long held power over the people. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't without risk. The system is built to protect itself, and those who challenge it are often silenced. I knew the dangers. I knew that taking a stand could mean losing everything. But sometimes, you have to risk everything to stand up for what's right. And the truth is, there was no way I could live with myself, knowing that I had the power to change something, to challenge the corruption, and yet chose to remain silent. The fight for justice isn't just about confronting the powerful. It's about confronting the apathy, the complacency, and the fear that keeps others from standing up as well. By taking action, by writing that letter, I hope to ignite something in the people, to show them that they don't have to accept corruption as the status quo, that there is power in resistance, that they have a voice, and that their voices can bring about change. As the letter went public, and as the world watched the reaction unfold, I knew that the message was spreading beyond South Africa's borders. This wasn't just about exposing Ramaphosa's crimes. It was about showing the world that resistance is possible, that one person, one voice can make a difference. We all have the power to push back against corruption, to stand up for justice, to demand accountability from those in power. It's not an easy fight, and it's certainly not a fight that everyone is willing to take on. But in that moment, when the truth came to light, I saw something remarkable begin to happen. The people were waking up. They were seeing the system for what it really was. And in that moment, they understood that they too could rise up against it. The real power of resistance doesn't come from the strength of one individual. It comes from the collective strength of the people. When we unite against the forces that oppress us, when we say no to the corruption, to the lies, to the exploitation, we become a force to be reckoned with. The moment I took that first step, the moment I spoke out, I knew I wasn't doing it alone. I was doing it with every person who had been wronged by the system, with every person who had been overlooked, neglected or silenced. They were all behind me, even if they couldn't speak out themselves, and that gave me the strength to keep going. What I realized more than anything is that corruption thrives on silence. It thrives when people are too afraid to speak up, too complacent to act, or too hopeless to believe that change is possible. But once you break that silence, once you start to speak the truth, corruption starts to unravel. The system that once seemed impenetrable begins to show its cracks. The more people who stand up, the more powerful the resistance becomes. It's a ripple effect, a chain reaction that can't be stopped. One person can make a difference, but a movement can change everything. When I stood up, when I wrote that letter, it was not just about calling out one man, it was about taking down the system that allowed him to thrive. It was about showing the world that corruption in any form will not be tolerated, that we will not sit idly by while our leaders enrich themselves at our expense. And I knew deep down that if we could resist, if we could break the chains of complacency and fear, we would begin to reshape the future of this country. The power of the people is far greater than the power of those who exploit them. All it takes is for one person to stand up, and the rest will follow. That's how movements begin. That's how revolutions are born. The resistance against corruption has only just begun. I won't stop, and I won't back down, because I know that the fight is not just for me, it's for every South African who has been ignored, every voice that has been silenced, and every life that has been destroyed by the greed of those in power. And if we keep fighting, if we keep standing together, nothing can stop us. The truth is on our side, and as long as we continue to resist, change will come. The defeat of manipulation and lies. Ramaphosa's breakdown symbolized more than just a personal defeat. It represented the collapse of the lies and manipulations that had kept the people in the dark. His inability to respond to the truth proved the strength of the movement I had started. For years the people had been fed a steady diet of empty promises, false narratives and distractions. Lies that were crafted with the sole purpose of maintaining control. The system had worked by keeping the truth hidden, by manipulating public perception, and by making sure that anyone who dared to speak out was silenced or discredited. But when the truth broke through, when it finally came to light, it exposed the corruption, the deceit, and the hollow foundations on which Ramaphosa's leadership was built. And in that moment, when he stood there broken and speechless, it was clear to the world that the lies had lost their power. You see, manipulation thrives when people remain ignorant of the facts. It thrives when leaders are able to control the narrative, when they can shape reality to suit their own interests. Ramaphosa had been a master of this, carefully cultivating an image of a strong and capable leader. But all of that was built on a foundation of lies, a facade that had been carefully constructed over years of promises unkept, of truth hidden behind well-spun rhetoric. The people believed in him because they wanted to believe. They wanted hope. They wanted change. But in the end, it wasn't hope he gave them. It was betrayal. That breakdown of his, the moment when the truth became undeniable, wasn't just a personal collapse. It was the breaking of the chains that had held the people captive to his manipulation. For too long they had been kept in the dark, fed with just enough to keep them passive, just enough to make them think that their situation wasn't as bad as it seemed. Ramaphosa had used every tool at his disposal, his charm, his wealth, his connections to maintain this illusion. But no matter how much he tried to spin his narrative, no matter how many speeches he made or press conferences he held, the truth was stronger than all of it. The lies couldn't hold up forever. When I first began speaking out against Ramaphosa, I knew that I wasn't just challenging one man, I was challenging an entire system of manipulation. I was calling into question the very foundation upon which the government had been built. I knew that exposing the truth would shake things up. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew it was necessary. The people had to understand what was happening behind closed doors, had to see the reality of their situation, and had to realize that they had been lied to for far too long. What made Ramaphosa's breakdown so powerful wasn't just the fact that it exposed his weakness, it was that it showed the world the fragility of the system he represented. The lies that had kept the people in the dark for so long were no longer sustainable. The truth had a power that no manipulation could ever match. When he failed to respond, when he crumbled in the face of the reality that had been revealed, it wasn't just his leadership that fell apart. It was the entire structure of deceit that had kept him in power. The facade was shattered, and with it went a false image of the strong, decisive leader that he had worked so hard to create. In that moment, something remarkable happened. The people who had been kept in the dark, who had been manipulated into believing that Ramaphosa was their savior, began to see things differently. They saw him for what he really was, a man who had used his position for personal gain, a man who had been more interested in preserving his power than in actually delivering on the promises he made. And as they saw this, They began to ask themselves, how long had they been living in this lie? How long had they been complicit in this system of manipulation? And most importantly, what could they do about it? That's when the movement I had started truly began to gain momentum, because once the lies were exposed, once the truth was out, there was no going back. The people had seen behind the curtain. They had seen the mechanisms of control, the strings being pulled by those who were supposed to serve them, and they weren't willing to accept it anymore. The resistance I had been fighting for, the movement I had started, grew stronger with each passing day. As Ramaphosa faltered, as his lies were unraveled, the people grew more determined to hold their leaders accountable. They saw the strength in truth. They saw the power that comes from speaking out, from rejecting the lies that had been shoved down their throats for years. It was no longer just about Ramaphosa or his failures. It was about a people who were finally waking up. It was about a movement that had exposed the corruption and deceit at the heart of South Africa's leadership. And it was about a future where such lies would no longer be tolerated. The breakdown wasn't just his, it was the collapse of everything he represented, everything the people had been forced to endure under a system of lies. What Ramaphosa failed to understand, what so many of those in power failed to realize, is that truth has a way of cutting through all the lies, no matter how deep the manipulation runs. The truth doesn't need fancy words or clever rhetoric. It just needs to be spoken. And once it is heard, there is no turning back. The people will always respond to the truth, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it challenges everything they thought they knew. The truth has a power that no amount of lies can overcome. So, as Ramaphosa stood there in front of millions, broken by the truth that had finally caught up to him, I saw something that I had been hoping for all along. A sign that the movement was no longer just about one man or one failure. It was about something much bigger. It was about the people reclaiming their power, about shaking off the shackles of manipulation, and about refusing to be lied to any longer. The defeat of Ramaphosa wasn't just his personal defeat. It was the defeat of all the lies that had kept the people under control for so long. It was a victory for truth, for justice, and for the future of the country. The movement wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. The lies had fallen, and with them the power that had kept South Africa in the grip of corruption. And as long as we stood together, as long as the truth remained on our side, there was no force that could stop us from forging a new path forward. A call for justice and freedom. My message has never been one of revenge. It's not about seeking personal gain or trying to tear someone down for the sake of it. This is a movement that goes far beyond personal grievances. It is a call for justice, a cry for the freedom of the people, and a demand for accountability from those who have held power over us for too long. This fight is not about one man or one failure. This is about ensuring that the voices of the people are heard, that their pain is acknowledged, and that those who have betrayed them are held accountable for their actions. It is a movement to restore dignity to the people, to remind the leaders of this country that they are not above the law, and to build a future where justice is not a privilege for the few, but a right for everyone. When I took the stand against Ramaphosa, when I wrote that letter and exposed the truth, I wasn't trying to incite hatred or division. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone's life. What I was doing was calling out a system that had allowed injustice to reign, a system that had exploited the very people it was meant to serve. The people of South Africa have suffered for far too long under the weight of corruption, mismanagement, and neglect. They have been let down by the very institutions that were supposed to protect and uplift them. And it is for them that I stand today, not out of vengeance but out of a deep sense of responsibility to ensure that their struggles do not go in vain. This fight is not over. The truth has been spoken, and the foundations of the system have been shaken, but there is still much work to be done. Justice is not something that can be handed down in one moment of revelation. It is something that requires continuous effort, unyielding commitment, and a constant challenge to the status quo. What I have started is not the end of the battle, but the beginning of a larger movement for change. It is a movement that will not rest until every voice is heard, until every life is valued, and until the leaders of this country are held to the same standards that they impose on the people they are supposed to serve. Justice is not just about punishing those who have wronged us. It is about creating a system that serves the people, a system that values the dignity and rights of every citizen. It is about creating a society where power is not hoarded by a select few, but shared equally among all. For too long we have lived in a country where the powerful thrive at the expense of the vulnerable, where those who hold the reins of power are able to manipulate the system to their advantage, while the people suffer in silence. This is the injustice that we must fight against, and it's not enough to simply expose it. We must dismantle the structures that allow it to continue. We must replace the corrupt institutions with ones that prioritize the welfare of the people, ones that ensure that every citizen has the opportunity to live a life of dignity and respect. But justice is also about freedom. The people of South Africa have been shackled by more than just the chains of poverty and inequality. They have been shackled by a system that tells them that their voices don't matter, that their struggles are insignificant, and that the powerful will always prevail. This is the system that we are fighting against. A system that seeks to silence the people to keep them in a state of subjugation and compliance. But the people are waking up. They are beginning to understand that they don't have to accept this reality, that they have the power to change it, that they have the strength to resist. Freedom means more than just being able to vote or speak your mind. True freedom means having the ability to live a life free from fear, free from oppression, and free from the corrupt forces that seek to control and manipulate. The freedom we are fighting for is the freedom to live in a society where justice is not just a word, but a reality for everyone. It is the freedom to build a future where the people are no longer pawns in a game played by the elite, but active participants in shaping the direction of the country. It is the freedom to know that your government will not turn a blind eye to your suffering, that your voice will be heard, and that your dignity will be respected. This movement is not just about me, it is not just about any individual, it is about all of us. It is about standing together as a nation, and saying enough is enough. It is about rejecting the lies, the manipulation, and the corruption that have kept us in the dark for too long. It is about holding those in power accountable, and demanding that they fulfill their duty to serve the people. It is about ensuring that the people of South Africa are not just subjects of a political game, but active participants in their own future. I understand that change is never easy. I understand that it takes time, that it takes sacrifice, and that it often requires standing up against forces that seem insurmountable. But I also know that change is possible. We have already seen the cracks in the system. We have already seen that the truth has power, that the people have power, and that the old ways are no longer acceptable. This is just the beginning. The fight for justice, the fight for freedom, is ongoing. We will continue to expose the corruption, continue to hold the powerful accountable, and continue to demand a future where the people are in control of their destiny. In this fight we are not alone. The people of South Africa, those who have been left behind, those who have been silenced, they are with us. They are the strength of this movement. They are the ones who will carry it forward, who will make sure that the fight for justice and freedom does not fade away. We are not fighting for revenge. We are fighting for a better future. We are fighting to build a society where the people are respected, where their voices are heard, and where justice is served. This is a call to action, a call to all those who believe in justice, in truth, and in the power of the people. The battle is far from over. It is just beginning. And as long as we stand together, as long as we continue to push for accountability, we will not be stopped. The future belongs to the people, and together, we will ensure that it is a future of justice, freedom, and dignity for all.